Hey folks, in this video I wanted to share a game with you that I played last night that I thought was pretty interesting and pretty instructive, especially if you're a King's Indian player. As you'll see in this game, I drew some inspiration from Magnus Carlsen and one of his King's Indian games that definitely helped me execute a lot of ideas in my own game. So this game was played at the St. Louis Chess Club just not too long ago, one of their weekly Blitz events. My opponent for the game is Grandmaster Robert Hungaski, strong player, good friend, visiting St. Louis, decided to play one of their events. And yeah, in this game he starts off with d4. I went for my usual King's Indian setup, and then he played 3h4. And this move has become really topical in the last couple of years. It's been pretty popular. The main idea behind playing h4 this early is to actually discourage black from playing the Grunfeld defense, because here if black plays d5, then after c takes d5, knight takes d5, and e4, black normally would exchange this knight on c3 and get rid of a minor piece. Here, of course, black can't do that, has to keep the knight on the board, and then white has kind of achieved something by avoiding this knight trade and keeping more space. But for King's Indian players, I think it doesn't matter too much. We're just going to stick to our normal setup here. And it's way too early, I think, for white to push h5. So my opponent went knight c3, d6, e4. This is kind of the usual way they play this position, eventually following up with bishop e2 and then advancing h5 from there. And here black has a lot of options. I decided to play knight to c6, which is definitely a very interesting move. The idea is to play a quick e5 and basically provoke white into advancing with d5. And this move was actually played by Carlsen in the game that I mentioned against Grandmaster Vladimir Fedoseev from the 2021 FIDE World Cup. And that was a really interesting game. I just want to show you guys how that game developed. It continued d5, knight e5. And in my game that I'll share with you after knight f3 was played, Fedoseev decided to go with bishop to e2, which I believe is the main move in this position, preparing knight f3. And I really like the way Magnus handled this middle game. So he goes h5, stopping white's h5 ideas. Bishop f4 is played, castles, knight to f3. Carlsen takes on f3, g takes f3, and goes c6. And now we get the same structure that we'll see in the main game. So queen d2, white's idea here is that they've completely ruined their kingside structure, but they do get the open g file, and one day white would like to move this bishop off of f4 and then play for f4, possibly e5, and get a lot of space in the center. So takes, king h7, a4, Magnus finds this nice maneuver, knight d7, a5, and now f5. Very, very strong move, opening up the rook and creating a lot of counterplay on the f-file. White played rook a3 here, preparing to defend the f-pawn in the future. Knight e5, bishop e3, and now just a fantastic idea here from Carlsen, f4. He pretty much sacrifices this pawn. I think white has to take it. Bishop takes f4, and now he follows up with bishop to d7. This bishop is kind of pinned along the f-file because f3 is hanging. So Fedoseev plays knight to d1, defending this pawn and preparing to just move the bishop out of the way. And here comes Carlsen's real idea behind his pawn sacrifice. He had in mind to follow up with rook takes f4, now sacrificing the exchange. And his point here is that after queen takes f4, bishop h6, white's queen actually can't get back into the game, is forced to sit on the king side. And after queen to g3, queen to f8, another very, very strong move by Magnus. He's now planning to put the bishop on f4 and just completely shut down white's position. So black here ends up down an exchange, but Magnus just starts playing it as a pure positional exchange sacrifice. And as we can see, white's position is actually very, very unpleasant here. The king on e1 isn't safe. If white castles king's side, the king won't be safe there either. Black is just going to have a ton of counterplay no matter what. And obviously black's pieces here are just exceptionally strong. So I'll show you guys a few more moves of the game just to see how Magnus converted this one. Trades on c3, starts bringing the queen over to the queen side to activate itself here. c4, now b5, very nice move by Magnus, just opening up more lines on the queen side. Takes. Here Fedoseev goes queen to g1. I think this was one of the major mistakes in the game. I believe he could have still tried to salvage things with king f1, or even the move castles here, which does allow bishop h3, winning back the exchange, queen h1, and I think Stockfish says that white is just marginally worse here, but clearly it's very difficult to play like this, and in general, it's just a very, very hard position for white to hold. So queen g1, this gives Magnus time to activate his queen on the a file, and after king f1, queen a2, we can see black's point, he's hitting the bishop, and just not letting white rescue the king, and more importantly, not letting white get the rook out of the corner, because these pieces are just completely outside the action. So we get a few more maneuvers here. Magnus brings the queen closer. He's just in total control over this position. Definitely this is a game worth studying in more detail, just with the grip and precision that Carlsen plays, I think is truly impressive. Queen g2, Magnus improves the king before going on any further adventures, breaks with e6, creating some more squares for his pieces, and now after bishop f5 is just a matter of time before black's pieces here are able to break through to white's king. So rook g1, white essentially has nothing to do but just sit and wait. King f7, rook g3, offering the exchange back, just to get some freedom. Magnus doesn't take it, knight d7. Now Fedoseev goes rook g5, effectively forcing black to take the rook, as at this point he's threatening to go rook takes f5 and then possibly create some counter chances. But at this point it's too late. Magnus just takes the material back, hg, knight e5, and this move actually forced resignation, as white is again just completely paralyzed, completely stuck. Black has threats of queen to c1, followed by knight to d3. The g-pawn is hanging. There's bishop h3 check to watch out for. And so white is just completely lost, and Fedoseev, I think, rightfully resigned. So I definitely had a bit of that game in mind as I was playing this game, and it really helped me kind of like handle myself in the middle game here. So hopefully it will be helpful for you guys as well. So in our game, Robert goes knight f3 before bishop e2, but we essentially get this same structure. I went with c6, just ready to open up some lines on the queen side and start creating counterplay. Bishop e3, bishop d7, queen to d2. I went queen a5 here, so a little bit different setup from Magnus, but the point is to just put some pressure on the queen side. Here white decided to go a3, possibly going for b4 soon. I took on d5, cd5, and I decided to play h5 just to not give white any more options of pushing the pawn any further. Now b4 is played. I decided to drop all the way back, queen to d8. Queen c7 I felt like would run into rook to c1. But I didn't feel like I wasted a lot of time provoking a3, b4 here, because my strategic feeling was that white's going to have a hard time figuring out where to put the king in this position. A lot of times white would like to castle queen side and then attack on the king side, but now obviously with these pawns further up, it's going to be much less safe to put the king on c1. So white goes rook to c1. I decide to castle. I'm not really worried about bishop h6 or anything like that. I don't think white has quite enough to attack just yet. And here white played knight to e2, which during the game I definitely felt like was inaccurate, because this gives black a chance to just create some immediate counterplay. One move I thought was interesting actually was just bishop to b5, getting ready to trade off the light squared bishops as soon as the knight moves. And with fewer pieces on the board, I feel like black's king is going to be reasonably safe. And in the long run, white's pawns on the king side, of course, are going to be weak. I decided instead to go a5, which I thought was also reasonable, just looking to open some lines on the queen side and taking advantage of the fact that white can't go b5 because I can just take it. So now knight f4 was played. I definitely thought this was wrong during the game. To me, knight d4 looked just very natural, just controlling all the squares in the position. But of course, white has attacking ideas in mind, and with knight f4, he's preparing stuff like rook to g1, possible sacks on the king side. To be totally honest, I didn't quite believe it. I felt like I should have enough to defend and create counterplay, so I continued actively here, a b4, and now rook to c8. Pretty simple move. Effectively, I'm just challenging white's rook on the c-file, and if we trade off a pair of rooks, then white's left with this rook on h1 that's kind of hard to get into the game, kind of like we saw in the Fedoseev Carlsen game. So my idea would be to trade off the pair of rooks and then get my rook into the game very, very quickly, and again try to generate counterplay on the queen side. So now white goes bishop to c4, And I remember seeing the idea that I ended up playing in the game pretty quickly. And I think I probably spent something like maybe 30 seconds here calculating. Again, this is an 8-minute game. At this point, I had something like 5 minutes left against a little bit less, maybe like 3.5 or 3 minutes. And I didn't want to spend too much time calculating here because as I was considering the idea rook takes c4, I realized that this was potentially quite strong with the idea of to follow up with bishop to b5 and cut white's king off from being able to castle. But I started kind of like second guessing myself and talking myself out of it. And as soon as I started second guessing myself, I decided to just trust my intuition and play the move. And so, yeah, once again, we see an exchange sacrifice. And my real idea here was that after bishop to b5, if white just gives back the exchange, let's say queen c2 or something, then I think black is just extremely happy here with reduced material. White has a lot of weaknesses eventually that we can play for. So I felt like out of principle, white should probably try to keep the exchange. And now my point was knight to d7 here, where the idea is that black wants to transfer the knight to e5, and then I'm hitting the f pawn. I have a possible knight d3 check as well. And I just felt like this was a very, very difficult position for white to play, especially given the fact that the king can castle, the rook on h1 is stuck, we have knight e5 coming, followed by activating the queen, either queen d7 or queen a8, somewhere along the a file. And yeah, objectively, I wasn't sure, what the engine is going to think of the sacrifice, but for a blitz game, I just thought it gave black huge practical chances, and yeah, it just makes it very, very difficult for white to defend. Now, the key move I thought was this move, knight to d3, just immediately blocking the bishop and hoping to castle next. Now, things really aren't so easy here for white because even if white does castle, the king on g1 is not going to be safe. Black can open up the queen, go after the h-pawn, and yeah, things can get very, very tricky. I was considering a couple moves here. I thought knight e5 might be interesting, just trading off the knights and opening up the bishop again, or possibly even just f5 I might have gone for, similar to what Magnus did, just opening up the rook and looking to create a lot of counterplay. Here the threat would be to take, for example, and then take on d3, and then get the knight into e5 with tempo, and then also look at that f3 square where the knight and rook are both targeting. So I felt like black would have quite reasonable compensation here. Instead, white played rook to g1 with the idea to meet knight e5 with rook to g3, kind of defending this pawn and keeping the rook active. But here I just felt like things were very, very similar just in nature to that Magnus game, where now white's rook is stuck on the king side, black is sacrificed in exchange, but it definitely feels like black's pieces are going to be able to get into the game a little bit more easily. So I played king h7 just to kind of get out of any like knight takes h5, rook takes g7 sacrifices. I felt like this, or bishop h6 stuff, I felt like this would just be a good prophylactic move. Now my idea from here is to follow up with queen to d7. For instance, bishop a6, queen to b5. This would be one plan, just looking at the light squares on the king side. And yeah, if you imagine the queen gets to b5, it's like very difficult to see how white is going to defend against all these threats. Another idea would be to just activate the queen along the a file and then get the rook in as well. Here white played bishop d4. Very reasonable move, just challenging the bishop on g7, but actually kind of anticipated this one already, and I already realized that bishop h6 would be just a very, very strong response, where I'm pinning the knight to the queen, threatening bishop takes f4, followed by knight d3 check, which would just win the game, or knight d3 check immediately. This forces bishop e3 to just break the pin, but now black can take on f4, go knight d3 check. White's king is forced over to d1, because stepping onto the diagonal would allow black to just pick up the bishop with a check, and then black is just going to be ahead in material and winning the game. So king d1 kind of forced here, and I had seen that I could just take on f4 and go bishop a4, winning back the exchange, and as a result we'd get some kind of heavy piece endgame like this, where I thought black should be doing really well because the king is safer. Maybe I can start with queen c8, maybe queen d7. I think queen a8 might be strong here as well, with the idea of just getting the queen in and eventually bringing the rook in and mating. I think there's definitely going to be some technical difficulties here because it's hard to move the rook without dropping f7, so I'd have to figure out how to activate the rook exactly, but yeah, definitely I felt like this position was winning, but when we had this on the board, once I looked at this position, I realized that queen a8 also must be really strong here, where, yeah, white's king is just not getting out of the light squared attack. So now I have threats of like queen a1 check, bishop a4 stuff, and it looks very, very scary. The key move to calculate, I think, was rook to a2, but I'd seen that I would have bishop a4 check here, with the point being after king to e2. Knight takes f4 is actually a lot easier, but during the game I saw knight c1 as being good enough. Hitting the rook, and after queen takes, the point is bishop to b5. Now the rook is undefended, and the king still can't escape. And after something like king e1, queen takes a2, I felt like this position should just be totally winning for black, because we've got opposite color bishops. I have a huge attack on the light squares, and the king is just stuck. Again, the rook is stuck on the king side. So something like bishop d2, I think black just starts bringing the pieces in, and it should just be a matter of time before white's king gets mated. Maybe queen b3, queen d3 as well. Okay, got to watch out for like f4 and white getting the rook back. But yeah, overall, I felt like this should be a very, very nice position for black. Instead, white played bishop h6. I should mention Hungaski had very, very little time at this point, because the position is getting really difficult, so he's essentially just kind of playing on his last seconds. Bishop h6 is a good try, though, hitting the rook, getting the bishop off of the attack, but just fails concretely. Now black gets queen a1 check, rook c1, I play bishop a4 check, king e2, knight takes c1, so everything comes with check. White doesn't have time to take the rook, queen takes c1. And here, definitely very, very important moment. I don't want to trade queens. I don't want to lose material. So we have queen a2 check, but we also have bishop to b5. I realized in time that queen a2 could be a huge mistake, because then white gets king f1. The king might actually be able to escape. So bishop to b5 check, not letting the king out. King to e1. And again, another critical moment, because the queen is hanging and the rook is hanging. But I felt like I found a very clean solution here, just simple move rook a8. Of course, I don't want to trade queens, but here if white trades queens, then we get rook takes a1 with check, and then of course the bishop on h6 is lost in the end. So white can't trade queens. He dropped back bishop to d2, but now with all the pieces left on the board, once again, black just has a winning attack here. So the rest was fairly simple. Queen to d4, threatening rook a1, threatening queen d3. White played bishop c3, queen c4, threatening the mate, queen e3. And okay, I think there's a lot of wins here. I was going to play rook a2, but then I realized queen f1 first is just winning the game with checks. And yeah, this was just game over. White has no good defense except bishop b2 and is just getting mated soon. And yeah, that's it. So white resigned here. And yeah, I was really quite happy with this game. You know, I felt like I knew the opening well, but of course the key moment was, I think, the exchange sacrifice. And having seen that Carlsen game earlier, that definitely gave me a lot more kind of confidence in this position to sack the exchange. Not 100% knowing it's good for black, but just feeling intuitively that in practical terms, the position should be very, very difficult for white to defend. And I think that did kind of play out. Well, all right, folks, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you found it instructive. If you did, please leave a thumbs up and comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hopefully I'll see you in a future video. Take care.